Demonstrations in cities across Iran, the biggest in nearly a decade. Protesters say prices are too high and the government's corrupt. In 2009, unrest was met with a military crackdown. So how will the government deal with the people's anger today? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Al-Barra. Death or freedom? It's a chant that was heard around Iran this week. Protesters are angry at the high cost of basic goods. The price of eggs, for example, has gone up 40% in just 6 months. Some Iranians say it's time for the government to focus on domestic issues and to forget Syria and forget Palestine. These protesters hope the Iran nuclear deal in 2015 would ease their financial struggles. Most international sanctions were lifted, but life for many Iranians has not improved. Government critics say the economic benefits of the deal haven't been passed on because of mismanagement and alleged corruption, and that the budget announced this month cuts vital social welfare programs while giving more money to religious and revolutionary institutions. More than 50 arrests were reportedly made in Iran's second-largest city, Mashhad, with the government saying the demonstrations were uncalled for and Iran's vice president saying the protests could do more harm than good.
All economic indications in the country are good. Yes, there is an increase in the prices of some products, and the government is working on fixing the causes of the high prices. Some of the events that have taken place in recent days are said to have been because of the economy. But there are other reasons. The people behind what is taking place think they will be able to harm the government. But when social movements and protests start in the street, those who have ignited them are not always able to control them.
Ishaq Jahangiri says the economic indicators are good, but not everyone agrees. Youth unemployment stands at more than 40%, and in the wider population, the number out of work has grown this year to more than 12%. China has been investing billions of dollars in roads and trains in Iran, but foreign investment from the West and most international banks is stalled because of US sanctions, and inflation has grown significantly this year. Let's go to our guests. Joining us here in Doha, Ali Fathallah Nejad is visiting fellow at the Brookings Doha Center. In Tehran, Gamba Nadir is a political analyst and journalist for Kayhan International. And from Munich by Skype is Afshin Shahi, senior lecturer in Middle East politics at the University of Bradford. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Mr. Nejad, let me ask you this. The protests that we're seeing in Iran, are they a genuine outcry over bad economy, deteriorating living standards, or this is something which is politically motivated?
I think it's obviously both. If you look at the real grievances in Iran as well as to the slogans that were chanted all across the country, what has been missed by many Iran observers during the last few years is that the Rouhani's economic policies have been a failure, because although we had experienced GDP growth, this GDP growth has not been inclusive. So basically what economists have found out that during the past few years, both poverty and income inequality have risen. So basically the promises that Rouhani gave in terms of the revitalization of trade with the outside world being trickling down to the normal Iranians has not materialized. So very early on, we've seen a lot of frustration from the lower and middle strata of society vis-à-vis those failed economic policies. And so there was a simmering below the surface, simmering discontent below the surface that is now going, that is emerging. On the other hand, when it comes to political repression, also things have not improved. So basically, there are both socioeconomic and political grievances.
Let me go to Mr. Nadiri in Tehran. Mr. Nadiri, it's a movement which is building up momentum now across Iran, people saying enough is enough. But what we've seen is that a government in some sort of denial about what's happening, saying these are just a bunch of people trying to destabilize Iran.
Well, you are absolutely spot on. I think the government actually prefers to look the other way, because they promised to fix the economy, the sorry state of affairs in the country, by signing a nuclear deal with the P5+1 group of nations. We waited 4 years for that, and after that, when they signed it, they said that we're going to fix the economy in 100 days, and didn't happen. Actually, we have this problem of runaway prices for the past 37 years or so. So this is an economic malady that refuses to go away, for the simple fact that we never had a powerful and a strong economic team in any of our current or previous governments. The current government's economic team is rubbish. They don't know how to handle the economy. They don't know how to take advantage of this new opening up to the world economy, and they just keep looking at each other. That is the problem. At the end of the day, we should also not forget the fact that these people are businessmen. They only think about themselves. They sponsored President Rouhani to win the election, both elections. They spend millions of dollars, and now they want something in return. So they get roles and positions in his cabinet, in many other areas of the government, and all they think about is their own interests and those around them. That's why people are paying the price, because nobody thinks and cares about the people. That's why I think you are right to say that the government is in denial.
Mr. Shahi, Vice President Ishaq Jahangiri seems to be blaming ultra-conservatives, particularly in Mashhad, for fomenting trouble. And as we know, that Mashhad is home to some of the most prominent conservatives. Some of them are vocal critics of Rouhani. To what extent Jahangiri is very accurate about this? So this is something which has been triggered by the conservatives.
It is extremely difficult to determine exactly what happened in the Mashhad on Thursday. But only a few hours after the beginning of the protest, we started to see kind of Iranian political factionalism in every sense of the term. The supporters of the government and people who were from the government, like Mr. Jahangiri, blamed the other faction and blamed basically the conservative segment of the Iranian political establishment to kind of orchestrate the protests in order to undermine the government. And at the same time, the Iranian government tried to blame Iranian political factionalism primarily for the level of instability that we see in the country at the moment. But just like going back to the point which was raised by your guest from Tehran, he blamed the government of Mr. Rouhani for the current economic failure. Without any doubt, if we want to look at the situation with a level of fairness, of course, the last few years has been extremely difficult for Iranian economy. But to be frank and to be fair, there is a limit to what the government of President Rouhani can do. According to some estimates, between 50 to 60% of the Iranian economy is controlled by IRGC, and this is an area that President Rouhani cannot control. According to Transparency International, Iran ranked as 131 out of 176. Basically, Iran is considered as one of the most corrupt countries in the region and in the world, and a lot of these problems are structural. A lot of these problems are beyond the ability and the jurisdiction of President Rouhani.
Let's talk about some of these problems in detail. Mr. Najad, there is unemployment, which is on the rise. Inflation is a huge problem. The general sentiment among people is that the benefits of any deal, particularly the 2015 deal, is not trickling down to us. Has Rouhani failed to deliver on the promises he made for his own people?
So basically what we have to be aware of, that blame has to be put on both the government and the hardliners who control the bulk of Iran's state institutions, as was alluded to.
Basically what Shahi was saying.
Exactly. So the problem with Mr. Rouhani's economic policies is they have been neoliberal. So they have not been really wanting to address the social question that is quite huge in Iran. You have almost half of the Iranian population that lives around the poverty line. So, and this has been not within the interest of the Rouhani government to tackle with. On the other hand, we have the right-wing conservatives and populists who pretend to be caring about poorer Iranians' lives, but in reality, when they assume powerful positions, they do not engage in the distribution of wealth that would be beneficial to larger sections of society. So basically, both sides are to blame for this problem, for this socioeconomic malaise that Iran is finding itself. And also the chants from many of the protesters reflects this this criticism vis-à-vis all factions of the Iranian regime.
Mr. Nadiri, I mean, you've listened to what Mr. Najad and Shahi were basically saying. You cannot fairly lay the blame just on the Rouhani because an important chunk of the economy has historically been under the control of the conservatives in Iran, and therefore they use it sometimes for political reasons to undermine their own opponents. So what do you respond to that?
Well, the government has been very smart and successful in putting in blaming others for what is going on in this country, politically, economically, socially, you name it, whatever it is. The IRGC, it is true that it is in charge of the construction projects of this country, but they don't have access to US dollars.
Which is Iran's
it is the central bank that is directly controlled by the government, by the government that is, that is in charge of, balancing the value of national currency against US dollar, which, by the way, has gone through the roof over the past 6 years or so. So that is just one of the things that we should keep in mind. But the blame game here, blaming this and that, or arresting this protester or that protester, is not going to fix our country. I think we have to start asking the government to kick out some of those incompetent cabinet members that don't know what to do. They are just there, as I said, because of their money. They don't have any expertise. They only have political affiliations and financial affiliations to those interest groups around them, and they don't give a damn about people. Let's not blame the IRGC or the hardliners. The hardliners don't have a lot of power anymore. They don't have even budget because the government doesn't have enough money to pay them.
How can you say...
If the people are out there, they have every right to
How can you say...
Because
Mr.
they are under
Nadiri, how can you say
hardship.
they don't have power when every single commentator of the Iranian political life knows that they have absolutely the ultimate say over politics in Iran?
The problem is not IRGC or the hardliners. The problem is those who are taking advantage of the chaos that we are now in, using U.S. sanctions to smuggle goods into the country, to steal and smuggle oil and gas or whatever else is outside the country. Many things is going on here. I think this is a huge mafia. They are all together. They are using this. They are politicizing everything in order to make money, and they don't give a damn about people. As I said, people have every right to protest against runaway prices, against unemployment, and the fact that we don't produce anything anymore. And the government has to take responsibility before things get out of hand.
So if I can jump here.
Yeah, please
I think
go ahead.
we have a fundamental problem when it comes to discussing Iranian politics. The issue of factionalism is quite overblown. So, we tend to think of Iran of having, different factions of the elite, one being the reformists or the centrists that are now seem to be in power. On the other hand, we see the right-wing conservatives and populists. But in reality, both factions are in the same boat, and they are for the survival of the Islamic Republic as a system. So they have more common ground than differences. And a prime example of this are the budgets of President Rouhani, because they give also a lot of money to his so-called opponents. So, for example, the IRGC has seen, massive increase in funds. And also other so-called religious foundations have also benefited from the budgeteering of President Rouhani. So all this talk of factionalism is quite overblown, and at the end of the day, all factions sit in the same boat, and this boat is called regime survival.
It's been quite interesting, and let me now go to Mr. Shahi, that during the protest, people were saying, stop interfering into the affairs of other countries. We don't care about Yemen, Syria or Palestine. You should care more about us here in Iran. How significant is this discontent, this outcry from the average Iranians?
It is very significant and symbolic at the same time. But what we heard yesterday and today is not anything new. More or less, we heard similar slogans in 2009. No to Gaza, no to Lebanon, no to intervention here and there in the Middle East. So please, more attention to what is happening at home. So despite the fact that, of course, we haven't heard anything like this, at least in a major public demonstration since 2009, but what was said yesterday and today, is not new in any sense of the term. And the other kind of point that I need to raise, because we've been talking about political factionalism, and your first guest accurately said that actually when it comes to regime survival, both the conservatives and reformists have a lot in common. And actually what happened a month ago was very important and telling at the same time, which could make us understand what is happening right now and the level of tension and the level of vulnerability that the regime facing. About a month ago, there was an earthquake in Kermanshah. And in the matter of a few hours, we saw this incredible national mobilization. People were mobilizing and organizing in order to respond to the problem, because they thought there is very little trust exists between government and the civil society. So effectively, they gave up. They gave up on state institutions in order to address the problem. And they chose celebrities like footballers as the people who could be the bridge between what they contribute, what they donate, and those people who have been affected.
I see your point.
in Kermanshah.
Mr. Nadiri, the reason why I'm asking the question about the people being very critical of the foreign intervention is that it's an intervention that comes at a huge price, because you need to spend money to maintain regimes in Syria, in Yemen, and also in different parts of the region. And people basically have been using slogan anti-establishment, anti-Rouhani, and also anti-Ayatollah Khamenei. So how serious is this discontent taken by the establishment?
Let's not get carried away with the politicization of the situation. There will always be some people who will try to take advantage of the situation to politicize matters, and I'm afraid they have been successful in doing that for the past 2 days or so. We have similar protests taking place across the globe when things get tough in economy, when people cannot make ends meet. But the only difference there and here is that they don't politicize matters. Here they are trying to politicize these kind of things, and I'm afraid I think I have to make it absolutely clear that Iran has every right to protect and support its allies in the region, for the simple fact that if we don't defeat Daesh and Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups in places like Syria, Yemen and Iraq, we will have to fight them here in the capital. We have to fight them here because they will be here. So it pays off when you spend money on your own national security. Those who are trying to question the presence of Iran in these countries don't have any idea what terrorist groups like Daesh could do to Iran. So Iran has every right to send them weapons and spend money in order to protect itself and its own borders here.
US President Donald Trump has long been critical of Iran's government. He says the world is watching how Iran responds to the demonstrations. In a tweet, he said there are many reports of peaceful protests by Iranian citizens fed up with the regime's corruption and its squandering of the nation's wealth to fund terrorism abroad. He added that the Iranian government should respect their people's rights, including the right to express themselves. Mr. Fathullah Najad, you've heard the statement from President Trump, and we know that Trump is yet to certify by mid-January if Iran is complying with the nuclear deal. You know that the American position itself has created many problems for the international investors and also for the Iranian economy, because no one is excited about going now to Iran to invest. To what extent the American factor has been very critical in destabilizing and undermining the Iranian economy?
Let me first say one thing about the combination of international and domestic slogans that were chanted throughout the protests. And I think a lot of Iranians are more critical of the version that Tehran presents when it comes to foreign intervention, particularly in Syria when it comes to supporting the Assad regime. And I think what Iran is doing in Syria is far beyond fighting terrorism, and it's actually supporting a dictatorship. And I think a lot of Iranians do understand that, and they don't want to see so much bloodshed also from the Iranian side, so much money, billions of dollars being spent on those adventures. On what President Trump has tweeted is a disservice to the Iranian people. And, Mr. Trump is certainly not a torchbearer of democracy by any account. And any kind of, so-called support for the, Iranian citizens' rights of protest is sheer hypocrisy. Mm-hmm. When it comes to the decertification, or the decertification that is probably going to happen by mid-January, this will perhaps be accompanied by the end of sanctions relief from the US side. Mm-hmm. And this would put the entire nuclear deal on the verge of survival, on the verge of collapse. Mm-hmm. So we will see if we're going to see a lot of economic sanctions. But when it comes to the economic problems of Iran, so we have also to look at the government's economic policy.
The reason why I'm asking the question about the American factor, Mr. Shahi, is basically the Iranian government saying that we have fulfilled our commitments when it comes to the 2015 nuclear deal. However, the Americans are backstabbing us by threatening to decertify, by putting more pressure on the international donors and investors to come along and invest in Iran. To what extent this is a very accurate statement by the Iranian government?
This is completely a different issue. But what is important that we need to kind of bear in mind that over the last year or so, Mr. Trump single-handedly has contributed immensely to the sense and the new wave of anti-Americanism among various segments of Iranian civil society. And one of the main factors behind this new sense of anti-Americanism is basically Trump's ideological approach to basically 1+5. And of course, there are definitely some shortcomings when it comes to economic policies and economic development by the government of Mr. Rouhani. But at the same time, we should not completely ignore the international dimension. Over the last 2 years, the government desperately has been trying to kind of invite more international investors. When it comes to kind of the energy sector, they had a degree of success. But given current American kind of antagonism towards Iran, and given what is happening right now in Washington, Iran has not become a very kind of attractive destination or spot for international investment. So, of course, we have to scrutinize kind of the current policies of the government when it comes to economic development, but this international dimension and the Trump factor is equally important to let us basically have a better understanding of the current economic impediments.
And how things will evolve. Mr. Nadiri, over the last 48 hours, we've seen many people basically drawing some parallels between these protests and the 2009 Green Movement. To what extent this is really true?
I think this is overblown, exaggerated. Let's not get carried away. People have every right to demonstrate and ask, for some answers from the government, and the government is responsible to act on them and fix and meet their legitimate demands, like creating jobs, keeping prices down, and avoiding this kind of inflationary, things that are happening in our economy. But at the end of the day, these are just small groups of people that are protesting. At the same time, some people also are trying to politicize this kind of this kind of situation. But it has nothing to do with the 2009 post-election unrest, and everything to do with people's legitimate demands to have a simple life that they can go and work and make money and make ends meet. That is not illegal. The government should stop arresting these people. The government should stop blaming others. The government should start acting on what people are wanting, which is,
I see your
having
point.
a good life, a good living standard.
Okay. You want to say something?
In terms of the comparison to the Green Movement.
In less than 20 seconds, please.
So the Green Movement's failure was not least because of the fact that they did not address the social question. And now the social question is out there on the streets, and it remains to be seen if it can be organized.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Ali Fathullah Najat, Gambar Nadiri, and Afshin Shahi. Thank you very much indeed for your contribution. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJInsideStory. From me, Hashim Ahlbar, and the whole team here. Bye for now.